Hello, and welcome to the 18th episode of the Cantina Chatter Podcast. In this episode, we begin our two-part limited series, Why We Collect. As toy collectors, we often talk a lot about our favorite toys. Some of us might make YouTube videos reviewing the latest action figures from our favorite companies. Others might create podcasts speculating about what might be coming in the future. On Instagram, we might post photos of our most recent acquisitions, or we might even attend toy conventions to see what is on the horizon. But one thing we don't often do is talk about why we collect. How did we get into collecting? Where did our passion for little pieces of plastic come from? How much joy does it bring into our lives? And when we're not collecting, how does it affect our lives? So thanks to the 4 guests who will be joining me for the first part of Why We Collect, we will attempt to answer these questions. Erin is the man behind Toy Shelf Review, a YouTube channel that focuses on exclusively Star Wars toys and collectibles. Erin, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on.
So Erin, one of the things I enjoy about your channel is that you tend to give a lot of your energy to older Star Wars figures, which in the modern Star Wars line go back to the Power of the Force 2 line from 1995. As someone who began collecting Star Wars back in 1996, I'm always filled with a wave of nostalgia each and every time that I see a new review from you. So tell us a little bit about the first time you figured out that Star Wars was worth collecting.
Well, in a way, it was kind of like, maybe like most, it's this boyhood dream of, having this room filled with toys. And of course, growing up for me and many others, the internet wasn't a thing. You didn't know that this was something people did. And it was around it was late 94. I was going to school for television video production and started to help out this cable access show. It was called Collecting Stuff with Butts and Wits. And that's what the show focused on, was collectibles, toys. And he would have guests come on who lived in the area. They would bring parts of their collection with them. And it ranged from like beer bottles and, your normal comics and coins, but toys as well. And so working on that show really is where I discovered kind of the passion. Like, oh, this really is something people do beyond just, comics and coins and stuff. And I remember we were doing the show, they opened up the magazine, and there was the promotional material for Star Wars coming out. And I was like, this is it. Yes. Like I can get in on the ground floor of something when it's just starting out. Of course, I didn't think it would be going for so long, but so I didn't factor on how big of a collection it would turn into. But that's really where it started for me, is doing that show, discovering that this is a thing that just a lot of people do, and seeing everyone's collections just really inspired me to do mine.
So clearly you were already a pretty big Star Wars fan when the Power of the Force 2 rolled back around.
Yes.
Star Wars, I think, for a lot of us, obviously, and this is something that's been spoken about a lot, is very meaningful to a lot of people, and a lot of people that actually get into collecting Star Wars memorabilia. And I mean, that totally shines through your channel when I watch each and every one of these videos. It's clear that you have a passion and a lot of knowledge for this stuff. I mean, obviously, when you've been collecting something for 20 plus years, you're going to know a thing or two about it. So,
yes.
So in what other ways did collecting Star Wars impact your life?
Trying to think. I obviously kept me busy, spent my money on it. So yeah, broke. I guess in other ways, well, now this, I've started the YouTube channel out of it, and it's kind of helped me in a way open up more. I've never been one who's been overly active online and stuff, so I suppose personally I've grown more and started talking to other people, and now being on your podcast and some other podcasts. So in that way, it's just opened up my own world a little bit more.
That's awesome. And, that's a point that I completely agree with. Naturally, I'm a very shy person, always been very introverted, but definitely doing the channel Victoria's Cantina, and then, branching off to the podcast and, being involved in some collaborative projects with other people has definitely helped me open up as well. And I really like that you bring up that point, because it is certainly true. I mean, if you're shy and, kind of more of a background person, behind the scenes, I think it is a great way to branch out and come out a little bit more.
Yeah, indeed. I wanted a way to share what I had. I have obviously a very large room filled with toys, and aside from a few friends and now my children who have friends, it only exists in that manner. Like no one's coming through, there's no tours or anything. And I wanted a way to share my collection, share my passion. And, even that wasn't a quick realization. Like as I mentioned, I went to school for production, and it's what I enjoy doing. And so I always get these itches, like I need to create something. And I was like, for some reason, it took me years to really figure out that I'd like to do something on YouTube, because it's already been around 10 years. And I was sitting in my toy room trying to figure out, what could I do? And I have to tell you, there was a lot of thought into that before I started, as I'm looking around my room like, oh, well, there's a lot of content I could do. And that's what it came from, is that, a lot of review channels, and I see why, because that's where you get your traffic. You do the newer toys. But I also wanted to go back in a way of, what if YouTube was around, 20 some years ago when these toys were coming out, and have that way of going back and looking at these figures that, even though they're considered the modern line, getting vintage in their own right. 20 years ago, that's quite a long time for a toy. So now you can see the progression of the way the toys have been designed, what they used to look like, and have a comparison of where we're at now.
Yeah, absolutely. Doing the YouTube channel definitely helps to express, how you feel about collecting. And I do totally agree with you how you say that anytime we focus on newer products, that's something that a lot of people do. But when you actually step back and look at and say, hey, this actually came a long time before this. This is how it has grown over the years. I think that speaks to people in a different way. And I'm sure you're familiar with some of my videos. I like to go back and explore some of the older stuff too, especially when it comes to older Kenner product like Jurassic Park or some of the older Batman lines and so forth. I mean, it's a history. I mean, we didn't just arrive, obviously, at the new current Black Series or whatever the main current line is. I mean, it was an evolution all the way back from the vintage days into the 90s, Power of the Force, and all the multitude of lines that came since then. So I really do love that you focus on a lot of the older stuff, and it really helps to show that bridge, because if you go to YouTube now, you really see mostly a focus on stuff that's recent within the last few years. And it is really refreshing to actually step back and look at some of those older toys. So really love that you do that.
Thank you.
Erin, is there anything else you would like to share with our listeners?
Enjoy it for what it is. In the end, these are obviously toys, and find the fun in it. For me, it's still in the kind of reliving my childhood. That's what it is, and just appreciating it for what it is.
Awesome. Well, Erin, hey, I'd like to thank you again for coming on to Cantina Chatter. Your channel is very professional, very well put together. And as I mentioned, you're passionate, and it comes through. So I hope that anyone listening definitely makes it a point to go and check out the wonderful reviews on your channel.
Oh, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
With more than 60,000 subscribers, Jurassic Collectables is one of the largest Jurassic Park and dinosaur-related channels on YouTube. If you've ever looked up a Jurassic Park Kenner review on YouTube, chances are you've probably seen one of his videos before. JC, thank you for being with me today.
Thank you for having me on. I'm honored.
So I believe that each collector got into collecting because of a passion for the source material from which those collectibles came from. So what was your first experience with Jurassic Park and dinosaur toys in general?
I was one of the few who actually saw Jurassic Park on videotape before they saw it in the cinema, because I was about 6 years old. So it wasn't actually the actual film narrative wasn't part of my life, but the merchandise infiltrated my life first, and I suppose that's maybe why I'm so enamored with it still. But I think it might have been something along the lines of the candy eggs that were put out by Topps, where you had a plastic candy egg that was kind of like a semi-sphere of plastic, and you took them apart, and inside was a little rubber cast dinosaur. And I think that might have been one of my first Jurassic Park pieces of merchandise or toys. The other one was Muldoon. He was my first action figure, and I remember specifically paying, I think it was £5, $4.99 for him in the UK. And he was in my local Toys R Us, and I was over the moon to own a Jurassic Park figure, an official Jurassic Park figure. And the reason why I went for him is because he came with a T-Rex, a mini T-Rex. And I remember thinking, oh, I really want the big T-Rex, but this is kind of like getting me part of the way towards having a T-Rex.
That's kind of similar to an experience that I had with the young T-Rex back in '93. I was aware of the big T-Rex, but the first thing I'd come across, at that age, I think I was 8 when Jurassic Park came out. That was the first one that felt feasible for me to own.
Yes.
The young T-Rex. So I remember being we have a store called Target here in the U.S. I begged and pleaded with my mother, hey, let me have this toy, and I'll do all the chores you want. And it took me a very long time to work the toy off, but she bought it for me. So that was my very first Jurassic Park toy. And
that's brilliant.
Yeah, so I can totally relate. You kind of got to have a smaller Rex before you can graduate towards that bigger T-Rex.
Absolutely. And actually that T-Rex was my Christmas present that year, and I'd asked for the big red T-Rex. And obviously they'd gone into Toys R Us, and I don't even think they had the big red T-Rex, or they'd sold out. Who knows what happened? It was probably the most sought after toy that Christmas. But I think it was my grandparents got me the smaller young T-Rex, and I was just as happy with it because it was official Jurassic Park merchandise, so I was over the moon.
Absolutely. And it was still way cooler than pretty much any other T-Rex on the market up to that point.
Oh, it was amazing with the rubbery skin and the flesh wound, the gory flesh wound. I think as a kid you loved like gore because it felt so sort of like naughty, It was sort of like, this is a really gory toy and I've got it.
Absolutely. And you mentioned your grandparents as well, and that's interesting because it was my grandparents that gave me the big red Rex for Christmas '93.
Wow, that's cool. We've got more in common than we realized with our Jurassic Park collecting.
Absolutely. So did you collect dinosaurs first, or was it Jurassic Park first?
I'm trying to think now, actually. I know I was learning about dinosaurs at school around the time that Jurassic Park came out. I think I must have had some museum type dinosaurs. Like there's a company that was called Invicta Plastics, and they made, I've got some of them on the channel, but they're like natural history museum models of dinosaurs that you could get at museums at the time. I think I had a pteranodon, would have been a pterodactyl back then, and it was cast in like orange plastic. And the reason why I had it was like the cheapest one I could find when I was younger. But I think that might have been the only other dinosaur I had. I think it was Jurassic Park was kind of like my introduction to dinosaur toys. Very
nice. I think the first dinosaurs that I had were the Imperial dinosaurs. I remember those very fondly.
Oh, nice.
Yes, they were very mass-produced dinosaurs. They looked okay back before Jurassic Park. And one thing that little tradition that my family had is on Saturdays we would go out to the swap meets and the flea markets trying to track down dinosaurs, not Jurassic Park dinosaurs because this was like a little bit before, but just dinosaurs. And recently, a couple years ago, when I was back visiting home, I found several of the Dino Riders dinosaurs. I didn't even know that I had those, but apparently I did. So that was pretty interesting.
Oh, they're cool. I like their design. They've got really nice beady eyes.
Yes.
And that's something you didn't really get in any other. That kind of remind me of. Do you remember Boglins?
Boglins.
Like they were like little rubber sort of toady looking toys, and they had little sort of glass eye type things, and sort of boglins and old Tycho Dino Rider dinosaurs. They sort of remind me of a similar thing because they had very twinkly eyes.
Interesting.
Very realistic looking.
Yeah, that was one of the cool things was, like you say, the eyes, the proportions on them were pretty decent for the time.
Yeah.
So do you remember a specific day or a time that you said, hey, I can start a Jurassic Park collection? Or was it more of an organic thing that sort of developed over time on its own?
You know what? I think when I was younger, I didn't intend to have a collection. I think it was more like I just got everything that I saw that was related to Jurassic Park at the time. And probably the thing I was most interested in was how the dinosaurs looked so real, because up until that point, they'd just been sort of things I had to imagine at school, and I'd been taught about them. And then when I saw, clips of Jurassic Park online, they were suddenly made really real. So I just wanted anything to do with the dinosaurs. And I remember me and my dad went into a newsagent's in town, and he lent me some money to get the Making of Jurassic Park book. And actually, he was the one who picked it up and flicked through the book, because my dad was quite a collector of books when I was younger. And he flicked through it and he went, oh, look at this. And he showed me it. And it was almost like his inspiration inspired me at that moment. I really specifically, vividly remember that happening. And then him saying, right, I'm going to give you the money you need to get this book, because it obviously inspired him as well as inspiring me.
Oh, wow.
And that was a nice sort of shared moment where that kind of thing made me instantly want more about how the film was made. And that was kind of like my intention when I was collecting. When I was getting those trading cards, they had little bits of information on the back. So it was kind of like collecting information in a sort of weird, you don't really understand it when you're little, but you just want to learn more. So I think that's where it came from.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's awesome. And I don't remember that book specifically, but I had there was a Topps magazine here that,
right.
Yes, it was kind of a little bit of behind the scenes and very informative about the park. I think it had a map of Jurassic Park and the island, and
nice.
And some of the artwork that was done for the film, the Crash McCreary artwork. And I actually tracked that down on eBay a couple of years ago, and I did a live unboxing type video where we opened it up.
Oh, I'll have to go check that out. Cool.
Yeah. And
is it the souvenir magazine? Was it the
Yes.
souvenir? Yeah,
Yes.
Okay, cool. I've got that one, but I've got it in its shrink wrap, and I haven't had the time to find a duplicate. So I can, when you're kind of like, oh, it's so nice in there, I can't open it up.
Exactly. And in fact, I actually bought 2 of them for the same reason.
Oh, see, I need to do that. They're not too bad online, are they? They're fairly reasonable if you want to find one of those.
Right. I think when I got mine, one of them was actually in a bundle with the Dilophosaurus. I got it like that, and it was maybe about $10, $15. This was a couple years ago before the prices exploded.
Oh, my goodness, tell me about it.
Oh, yes. And then the other one I have, I think I got it around $5, so really not too bad at all.
Yeah, I'll have to see if I can pick up a loose one somewhere and have a read through.
Absolutely. And it's really cool because it does come with the cards and a few different little things there. I think it was like a little booklet.
Yeah, that's cool. I'll have to have a look. It's funny how when you look at those old collectibles, you're kind of transported back to that time when you were little, and you kind of imagine what it would have been like if you had this when you were younger and how much you would have cherished it.
Definitely. I was in 3rd grade, I believe, was after the summer that Jurassic Park came out. And that souvenir magazine, I took it with me to school all the time. And I lost track of what happened to it over time. But I remember getting a lot of attention for having that souvenir magazine.
That's cool. Yeah, that's good. And did it have any behind-the-scenes stuff in it as well?
As I recall, it may have had a few photos. I haven't looked through it since I did that video. But it did have a lot of information and statistics about the dinosaurs, which I always was really enamored with statistics like the height, the length, the weight, all that sort of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Always captivated me as a kid. So what inspired you to create Jurassic Collectables?
Oh, gosh. Well, I think it was 2009. And for some reason, one day I just thought I'd really like to get that red T-Rex that I didn't have as a kid, and I'd really like to get it like in the box. I wonder if it exists in the box as it would have been if I'd walked up in the store and found it new. And I can't remember where this came from. Maybe I was searching online for this toy and I just was really excited about it. And I think I did some Googling online, and maybe a handful of people had done videos on this red T-Rex, but there weren't very many. And none of them really showed it in its box, in its kind of glory. So I ordered one. I got it delivered. I think at the time it cost me $124. I don't know whether that's cheap now. I'm trying to work out how much are they now.
Probably closer to 200, I would assume.
Yeah,
at least.
So it was $124 at the time, and I remember thinking that's quite a bit of money. And I remember thinking, but you know what? I really want this. So I ordered it, and it arrived. And I remember wanting to share it with my friends, and I was thinking, right, okay, well, no one's done a video online of it in the box. I'm just going to do a quick edit, film it, do some quick camera moves on it, and then upload it as a video. And I thought, well, if I'm going to put up a video, I need to make a channel. So I'm like, okay, well, what should I call it? Jurassic Collectables. And a few people have pointed out, they said, oh, isn't collectibles spelled with an I instead of an A? And it's actually, you can spell it both ways, which I didn't know, but I could have got it wrong at the time, and then it would have been forever a permanent spelling mistake. But so anyway, I sent that to my friends, two of my friends, and they both said, wow, this is great. I remember this toy. I haven't seen it in years. And it was just nice to get that feedback from about two people. And so then I think I did a few more videos, and I got hold of a replica raptor claw, because I think I fell in love with the replica prop forum around the same time. And I just did a few videos. I think I did like a handful of videos across the span of a year, and sort of left it for a while. And then I came back like a year or so later, and some of the videos had like hundreds of thousands of views. And I didn't know what to make of that. I just thought, so people like looking at Jurassic Park stuff. So then I think I started doing like the Triceratops unboxing. I'm not sure where the timing was with all of these videos, but I remember doing them around the same time. And then I think the video sort of spurred me on to collect more, to show more on the channel. So it kind of like was a reciprocal thing. So I got hold of like the Crash McCreary artwork, the litho prints that he did. And then there were a few other things, and eBay was like a treasure trove back then, because I would literally go online, type in Jurassic Park, and there would be loads of stuff. I'd be astonished at the price, and I couldn't not buy this stuff. Like, I remember I got a Mr. DNA animation cell, and it was $69. Something that was actually used in the production of Jurassic Park.
Wow.
And it's a frame that you can screen match, and it's a great frame. It's him looking all proud with his hands on his hips. I think it's his hands on his hips. I'll have to have a look. He might have one hand in the air. But I just remember thinking, this is like movie-making history, and I've just bought it for $69. And I remember thinking, wow, and that's the thing. It gave me a real buzz to kind of not only buy this stuff, but then showcase it and trade it with people who are also interested. And then the community started to build up. Mm-hmm. And it kind of just went from there, really. But I started it on a whim, really, with that T-Rex. It was just to show my friends the T-Rex in the box. How about you? How did your channel start?
It started. Let's see. We're going on. It'll be 5 years old in April.
Congratulations!
Oh, thank you. And the way that it started was I had been working for a company. It was a radio control car manufacturer, one of the biggest here in the U.S.
Right.
And the industry had begun changing, and I had been there for a few years at this point, and they started doing layoffs. And it was little by little, and we didn't think that they would lay off our department. I was in the customer service technical support department. I would do the repairs on the vehicles, talk to people on the phone. And finally, they called and said, this is your department's last month. We're going to outsource this department to a different company.
Oh, no.
And so I found myself with a little bit of free time right after that. And it was a time of change. I relocated. I was living in Orange County here in California, which is right outside Los Angeles. And
right.
I moved down to San Diego. And, I had all of these toys, and I was moving them, and I was thinking, well, I have all of these toys, and I haven't really finished unpacking or organizing them yet. Why not use this opportunity to maybe share a little bit about what I have in my collection and let people see what I've been building for the last couple of decades. So that's basically how it started. I would just kind of pull a few pieces here and there and share them. I never really thought it was going to become anything. It was just kind of something to do to keep me busy and to, to kind of share a little bit of my enthusiasm about these brands and these collectibles. And it just kind of grew from there.
It's funny how neither of us sort of intended it to be like, have so many subscribers and have all these people commenting on the videos, and it didn't really start off like that. It almost started off as a way of us sort of satiating something that as collectors we just felt like uploading this stuff.
Absolutely.
Do you know what I mean? It wasn't like we decided, oh, let's let millions of people look at this. That wasn't our intention. It was almost more like a sort of a self-motivated thing to kind of just put this stuff up there and just say, right, I've done that. It's strange.
Yes, absolutely. And then people started saying, hey, can you review this? Do you have this in your collection? If so, can you share it? And
that's great.
I mean, if you think back, your channel was already up and going at this point in time, but 5 years ago, there weren't the amount of toy review channels as there are now. I mean, there's a ton of them now for everything, really. And, it's interesting because now if you hop on there, you'll find a lot of the older collectibles and such. And but back at that time, that wasn't necessarily the case. So that was another reason for saying, okay, yes, I do have that. I'll show that to you since there isn't a video about this currently.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there was a lot of gaps to fill, and there's a lot of things that haven't been covered online. It's interesting to find stuff that hasn't been covered. It's always like an exclusive when you get something, you're like, oh, well, there isn't actually a video for this. I remember
right.
Back in the day, back in 2009 when I first started, there was like next to nothing about Jurassic Park stuff, and I remember thinking like, wow, there's loads of gaps here of things that people haven't talked about. The Topps collector's cards and all of this old stuff that I remember that was really like the cornerstones of my Jurassic Park merchandise experience.
Certainly.
I remember thinking, oh, I need to do a video on that. I need to do a video on this. So that kind of spurred me on to do more.
Absolutely. So, JC, in what other ways has collecting Jurassic Park toys and dinosaur models impacted your life?
I think it's probably in terms of the space that it takes up sometimes can be a problem, but it's never really been that much. I've got a very understanding wife. I have to say that. Thank God I've got a very understanding wife. But I'm actually very organized with my stuff. I tend to, I don't sell off a lot of stuff, but sometimes I'll trade stuff and get rid of stuff. I don't keep everything that I own. And actually over my lifetime, I've whittled stuff down, so I'm focusing only on Jurassic Park if I can. I've only got a few other things from other franchises that I let in, and I try and stay focused like that, and I'm quite organized with things. But I think generally it's just made my life more fun. It's made my life more pleasant to have these things around me that remind me of my inspiration. And I think it's nice to kind of every so often have a look at my display cabinet, and there's maybe something that was used in the production of Jurassic Park, and I'm very lucky to own something like that. And I think, wow, that's that's why I'm awake every day. That's why I'm so happy and kind of why I'm inspired about the world. I think if people can make stuff like that inspired me as a little child and as an adult now, then that's like amazing. That's what life is about.
Very beautifully stated, and I completely agree. I also have I have a husband who's very understanding and supportive, but
good.
The difference is that I'm not quite as organized, so that sometimes is a little bit of a problem. But I'm working on it, and I do my best. And in terms of display, I actually there's no way I could possibly display everything in the collection at one time, so I try and rotate things out every now and then.
Yeah,
but
I'm the same. I do that as well.
Nice. But I completely agree with what you stated about the enjoyment factor and the inspiration. I mean, I have all of my collectibles here in our home office, and
right.
I'll be working on schoolwork or serious type work, and it's always nice to take a little brief departure and go and fiddle with an action figure, or bring something to the desk and just have it there as I'm working. So
exactly. And I find actually as I'm getting older, like the things I'm making now are becoming more fun to look at. Like I'm a big fan of Adam Savage and the Tested channel. I don't know if you subscribe to that channel, but he's the ex Mythbusters presenter, and he makes a lot of stuff. And he says that when he like finishes making something that he's wanted all his life, he sort of puts it on his bedside table and sort of admires it. Like, I made that, and that's something I wanted. And I'm getting more and more like that with Jurassic Park stuff. I'm kind of like, oh man, I'd really like to just make that from the film, and it doesn't exist yet. So I think, oh, I'll make that. And that is even more satisfying, because it's not only is the thing inspiring to start off with, but then it's the fact that you've gone through the process and there's a journey that you've taken. And then when you see it again, you're reminded of it and you're like, oh, that was really cool. So actually things that people make, or I make, are kind of becoming like more things that I want to have on display, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And that actually reminds me of the Jurassic Park goggles you recently built, which are extremely impressive.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, that was real, like a labor of love. It was the type of thing where I'd come home at night and, you know, I'd be tired from work, and I think, right, okay, I want to crack on with that project now, because that meant a lot to me as a child, that prop. And I think if I can make this a reality, it'd be amazing. And it really started with me noticing that the lenses on Timmy's goggles resembled that Konica AI Borg camera. And when I saw that, and I was looking at the image of Timmy's goggles and looking at this camera, I'm thinking, that's the same thing. I'm thinking, right, okay, well, I ordered the two cameras, got them home, and I thought, right, okay, what do I need to do now? Went to a camera shop and said, look, this is what I want to do with these lenses. Can you do this? And for 3 weeks, they mulled it over. They basically said, yeah, we'll get that done. We'll send it to our guy who can do that. 3 weeks later, they came back, they rang me up and they said, well, we spoke to our guy and he says it's too difficult. And I thought maybe this isn't going to happen. Maybe I'm not going to make the goggle. Maybe I just should make a video now and just share this, you know, the fact that cameras are the lenses. And then part of me thought, no, you know what? I'm going to make these goggles no matter what. And there was something inside, this stubbornness inside, that made me think, you know what? I'm going to make these goggles no matter what anyone says. And then it took me a year to get them made. And but yeah, it was a good journey, and I'm glad I did it. It spent quite a few late nights sanding and filling, but it was worth it in the end.
That's wonderful. And they came out so authentic to Jurassic Park, and just the meticulousness that you took to it is just quite astounding. Just finding the exact materials that were used to create the prop and then replicating that on your own. I don't think that had been done before on this level. So just with that, it's absolutely incredible thing. And anyone who's listening, I absolutely suggest that they go and check out that video. Amazing project.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. And obviously you've got the Chronicle ones. The Chronicle Collectables are making screen accurate goggles, so they should be out as well. And I used a lot of their publicly released research to help build my own. So I have to give them credit for the 3D scans and the images that they uploaded, because that helped me enormously in getting the shape to a point where I was happy with it.
Awesome. So, JC, is there anything else you would like to share?
In terms of collecting, I think it really helps if you have a focus. I think some people will basically collect things that are, current right now. Star Wars will come along and they'll collect that stuff, and maybe this will come along and they'll collect that stuff. And that's good, because there's a lot of cool new stuff coming out. But I actually find, as I've gotten older, actually having a focus, like something you're really passionate about, like one little thing, if you stick to your guns, what happens is, because it goes in and out of season, you actually get stuff really cheaply every so often. And that's really cool, because that's your treasure, and you get that treasure for next to nothing. So remember what inspires you most of all when you're collecting, and wait for it. Be really patient, because you'll get some real treasure if you wait for it, and you'll get it for next to nothing.
Very thoughtful advice. I like that a lot.
Cool.
Well, JC, thank you for joining me today and sharing your collecting story. While I imagine that anyone listening is already familiar with you, especially since you already once collaborated with me on one of my own Jurassic Park toy videos.
That's right.
I still hope that they take some time to check out your fantastic and fun channel, which is dedicated to sharing the joy of dinosaurs and Jurassic Park collectibles with everyone.
Likewise, and I hope they check out Victoria's Cantina as well. Make sure they subscribe.
Thank you. Paul Harrison is the co-owner of Jedi Temple Archives, a well-known and established Star Wars collecting website that is updated daily. Paul, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Victoria. It's always a pleasure.
So last year, we did an episode of Cantina Chatter called State of the Star Wars Line. You told me that as a child, you became interested in Star Wars toys from a fellow classmate. Is that what got you started into Star Wars collecting?
Absolutely. I'm not sure if you recall the entire conversation, but at that point, I was, kindergarten, 5 years old, and had not even seen a Star Wars movie at that point. But it was the actual action figure that got me so enveloped in what these characters were, and just my playtime, and it was immediately all-consuming for me. The following year, I was asking for, the latest Star Wars characters for my birthday and Christmases and everything, Easter, anytime there was an opportunity to get a gift. And I mean, if you think back to those times, I know that we're sort of contemporaries to each other, but I mean, Star Wars was everywhere, kind of like it is now. But I mean, you couldn't go into a Jamesway or, all these old stores that don't even exist anymore, Caldors, without seeing, rows and rows and rows of action figures of Star Wars and boxes and end caps of Beast and mini rigs. It was everywhere. So a lot of us, developed our own storylines during our playtime, but Star Wars was presented in a totally different way than it is today, in my opinion.
Fascinating. It was the toys that inspired you to look more into Star Wars and to see the films.
Yeah, absolutely. There could be many factors too. I mean, we weren't an affluent family by any stretch of the imagination. So, going to movies was not really an option for us. We usually rented movies. So I guess maybe that had something to do with it. Back then, action figures were only a buck a piece, $1.99 a piece. So they were a little bit more affordable than going to the movies per se. But it was just I had the complete opposite experience. The toy line, the merchandising really made me become the obsessive fan that I am.
Wonderful. So Star Wars has been around for more than 40 years and is universally loved. There are so many different aspects to it across all types of mediums, with something for every type of fan. What about Star Wars spoke to you as a fan growing up?
Well, after I had initially become interested in it from, the action figure toy line, my dad took my brother and I to see Return of the Jedi. That was my first Star Wars theater experience in 1983, May, obviously. And it was such a simple but powerful story of good overcoming evil. And, I really didn't know much about Luke's journey at that point. I just saw him as I don't think I knew he was a new Jedi at that point, but I saw this guy struggling, trying to save his friends from Jabba the Hutt, and he had a rough start with the Emperor and Vader, but yet he came through at the end, and you saw someone as evil as Darth Vader, sacrifice himself because of the love of his son, and it was just something it was very earthy to me and very, very real, and my soul just acclimated with the whole premise of the storyline, and I just it's never to this day it's still my favorite film. It's just something I can't get out of my head. I'm so thankful I had that experience, and I'm grateful the film still has this decades long lasting power for me.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, Return of the Jedi, like the last third of it, everything with Luke and Vader and the Emperor, that's I think that's one of the most emotional scenes, if not the most emotional time of the entire saga, really. If you get right down to it, just the way that everything was handled. And I didn't see Return of the Jedi. I probably the late 80s, early 90s on television. It's probably the earliest I recall seeing it. But I did see it in the theater when the special editions returned. So in what other ways has collecting Star Wars impacted your life?
Well, I spent a lot of money I probably shouldn't have. But I don't know. It's a very enriching experience for me. it's a very rewarding experience. I'm sure you can relate. Every year as Kenner were making toys, and then when Hasbro picked up the license, you just saw the growth of technology come into play. You saw new approaches being made to action figures. We saw the advent of ball jointed articulation, and as we got older, the line got better and better, and it was kind of like growing up all over again with Star Wars, seeing that. So, while there weren't any new films per se, I'm talking about beyond the prequel trilogy, of course. We still saw growth in Star Wars from a collectible perspective, and I think that kept us engaged, really intensely and intently. And that's kind of where I'm at today. I know I'm not a big fan of the sequel trilogy, but that linking of product to the Star Wars experience is still pretty powerful. Like whether it be from Hasbro or from higher end licenses like SH Figure Arts or Sideshow Collectables, there's still something there for everyone, and I'm grateful for that opportunity after all these years.
Absolutely. It's still wonderful that there's still stuff to collect. I mean, I do wonder what the situation would be without the films, because obviously they're still doing these product line pushes, and it seems to be struggling in recent months, but there's still all this product that's being released to coincide with the films. So I do wonder sometimes if we didn't have these new films, would quality be better? Would there be no figures at all? It's just kind of something interesting to think about.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that there's too much on Hasbro's plate from the films don't stop perspective, and it's really affecting distribution, which distribution needed no help being affected, right? It already was a nightmare.
Right.
They just can't keep up with the momentum, and in all fairness, I don't know who could. I even heard rumors, and I can't substantiate this, but Disney's very specific on who they want produced as an action figure, where, Hasbro had a lot more autonomy before the Disney acquisition. So, maybe they are being forced to make a couple roses or rays more than they want to for, more than their comfort level, or I don't know. But it just seems like there's so many factors working against the health of the toy collectible line right now. And I don't know. Maybe the vintage collection will give them that freedom again. Maybe they will be able to have the flexibility to produce characters that they really couldn't waste slots for in the 5 POA line. So I guess we're going to have to wait and see. We're going to have to be patient for another year and see where the line takes us.
Yes, and very interesting factors as well. And I hope that it's not the situation where Disney says, okay, this has been running for almost a year, now you need to rest it again. I hope they're kind of allowing Hasbro to kind of do their thing a little bit more than usual.
Oh my goodness! In 1 year, they're probably only going to get out like 25 action figures. That'd be a total loss,
Absolutely. So when you joined Jedi Temple Archives, it had been going on for 4 years. Now that you co-own it, what prompted you initially to get into JTA, and what about maintaining it do you most enjoy?
Well, I've always been a source of information for other fan sites throughout the years. I've always been in contact with sources and provided leaks here and there for various websites, which I won't mention right now. But I said, this is ridiculous. I enjoy this so much. I probably could do this on my own, but I didn't have any confidence because I had no web developing skills whatsoever. And in 2008. Chuck Paskovich put an ad that he needed help, and I said, this might be my opportunity. And I sent him an email, gave him a call, and he said he would be willing to teach me the basics of, how to post an article and how to, do very, very basic stuff in Photoshop. So I learned it all for the first time in 2008, and just became really, really into it. And my sources grew and the information grew, and we grew, and I've just been so thankful and so humbled by it. It's been really great. In 2009, I saw that there was a lot of archiving out there, but not a lot of discussion about the intricacies of action figures. And the Legacy Collection Ugnaught inspired me to start that, and I've been doing reviews ever since. So it's kind of like a sick, unhealthy passion, I guess, but it's what keeps me going daily.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things I appreciate about your reviews is that they do very much go into detail about all the little specifics about the figures, the sculpting, the particulars with the paint applications and articulation. Very thorough, and I think that's quite awesome.
Thanks. I even tried to include some history about this figure was planned for the 30th anniversary collection, but it got delayed for the Legacy collection. Like any history I know, I think that's useful, and I'm a trivia freak, so I love stupid stuff that doesn't affect your life. I like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, if nobody documents that stuff, I mean, those are the sort of tidbits that are going to be lost to time within a short while. So it's great that you do.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so Paul, anything else you'd like to share with our listeners?
I just I appreciate any new visitors that we have at Jedi Temple Archives. We have some great people on our site. We have some cranky people on our site, and we love all perspectives. And if you have a voice or a passion about Star Wars, we'd love to have you join our community.
Wonderful. So, Paul, thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. I am sure that anyone listening is familiar with JTA already, but if they are not, it does remain one of the top sources for Star Wars toy news, as well as a vast resource thanks to the wealth of information available in the photo archives and the research droid reviews.
Thank you so much, Victoria. I really appreciate that feedback. It means a lot to me.
JC is the owner of Toy News International, a network of websites dedicated to reporting the latest in toy and collecting news, as well as his JC YouTube channel. JC, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to finally have you on the podcast in some capacity. Of course, we're speaking about how we got into collecting. So tell me a little bit about how your collecting interests began.
Well, I guess I've been collecting in some shape or form as long as I can remember. I mean, obviously when I was little, it was collecting toys to play with, but my first action figure line, at least that I can remember, is Star Wars. And I, collected, most of that through Return of the Jedi. I had most of the toys up until at least Return of the Jedi. Now I kind of got out of Star Wars probably about the time of the Power of the Force line with the figures with the coins and stuff, but I had most of the toys up until that point. And then from there I kind of switched over to G.I. Joe and Transformers. Again, collecting is something I would play with and enjoy from that capacity. But and then that led me kind of into comic books, and through most of my middle school years and high school, I was an avid comic book collector. I started out reading Transformer and G.I. Joe comics, and then that led me into things like Spider-Man and the X-Men and stuff. And eventually I would collect, and I'd buy 2 of every comic, and I would bag and backboard them, and all of which I still have.
Nice.
And I kind of, back then I was naive and thought, one day I'd have this huge collection that I could sell and essentially retire on. And unfortunately, most of the comics during that time period aren't worth a whole lot of money, but definitely that is kind of the beginnings of my actual collecting, or with the comic books. And that led me into things like superhero figures, with the first Batman movie, the Michael Keaton Batman movie. I got the Toy Biz Batman figure and Joker figure.
Oh, nice.
And was just picking up a bunch of Batman stuff. And then later, or shortly later, Toy Biz came out with their 5-inch Marvel figures, and that was probably the first line that I actually collected as an actual collector, not as buying toys to play with. And I got all of the figures in that first wave of Marvel figures, and then eventually expanded where I would buy multiples to keep one on card and one in the package and everything. And so that's probably really, like I said, led me into the actual collecting aspect of toys is the superhero figures.
Very nice. And, it's funny that you mentioned the Batman 1989 Toy Biz Batman, because that was actually my very first Batman figure.
It was mine too, and I still have it.
I
don't
too.
have the Joker figure anymore, but I still have the Batman one.
Nice. Yeah, I still remember the day. We were at a video game rental, myself and my dad, and he knew that I had just seen the movie, and I was way too young to have seen this movie. I was like 4 years old when I saw it in the theater. But I enjoyed it, I guess. So he ended up buying me one of those figures, and yeah, I still have it to this day. It has his little batarang. It still has a little belt with a string on it.
Yeah, the belt is the coolest thing. Like, you pull the belt and it would like pop back into place and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty awesome. So you seem to collect a little bit of everything, as do I, and it's difficult to have so many interests. So what franchise or toy line are you most passionate about?
Well, that's a hard one. I mean, again, my roots originated with Star Wars, and so I have a great love for Star Wars. Same with G.I. Joe and Transformers. Now, G.I. Joe, there's not a lot to collect these days, and Transformers, I really I'm a G1 Transformer fan, so I watched the Beast Wars cartoon stuff and even the later cartoons, but I never really got into the other toy lines beyond G1 for Transformers. So like nowadays, I pretty much just collect the Masterpiece Transformers, at least for personal collecting. And because I do this, cover toys and stuff for a living, there's a lot of stuff that I get and kind of collect for business purposes, and then there's personal. So, but for personal, G.I. Joe, Transformers, Star Wars, and then like the Marvel figures, and in recent years, DC. I've really gotten possibly more into DC figures in recent years than even Marvel. But growing up, and then in my earlier years, it was definitely the Marvel figures and the Star Wars and Transformers and G.I. Joe.
Nice. Yeah, for me, it's been a little bit of the opposite. I've kind of been more into Marvel Legends lately. I was a lot more into DC, a decade ago, especially when, at the time, at least Mattel was, just really killing it with the DC Universe Classics. And it seems like they haven't quite caught up with the year 2018 yet. So it's kind of been the opposite for me. I've been a little more into the Marvel.
Yeah, I mean, Hasbro's really been knocking it out of the park with their Marvel Legends these days, and I mean, definitely when comparing most of DC to Marvel, I mean, I got to give it to Marvel. But like, I really enjoyed DC Collectables Icons line, and was really disappointed when they kind of pulled the plug on that one. And I mean, like I said, I collect both Marvel and DC pretty avidly, but I guess because Marvel, there's so many Marvel. I mean, a lot of the Marvel figures we get end up being like repeat characters and stuff. So, and I mean, a lot of times they're much improved. So it's not that I don't like them. It's just that I guess the DC stuff is more fresh to me, because I didn't actually really collect I had some of the DC UC stuff from Mattel, but I wasn't an avid DC UC collector, so I don't have like a ton of those figures and such. So I guess that's why I kind of look at DC a little bit more, just because it's more fresh to me than the Marvel stuff.
Nice. And yeah, you mentioned DC Collectables. They've definitely come a long way. I think my first venturing into DC was when it was DC Direct, and they were doing the first line of Arkham figures. And I mean, even for the time, those were really nicely sculpted and detailed, but they were kind of brittle, and sometimes they would break. But they've definitely come a long way in all aspects. Just the overall quality has improved immensely.
Yeah, and DC Collectables, I mean, I have a lot of DC Collectibles stuff just through work, but I was never as fond of the older DC Collectible stuff, just because the articulation was never that good on those figures. And I'm a huge articulation fan. I'm not a big statue person. You won't see me collecting a lot of statues, and I'm not a huge fan of static action figures, 5 points of articulated figures. I mean, they have their place for, the retro, Star Wars. I mean, obviously started out with 5 points of articulation, but, I would much rather have a highly articulated Star Wars figure than a 5 points of articulated one, even though, that's the direction Hasbro's been going with the line in recent years.
Absolutely. I'm of the same frame of mind. I'm really not into statues or just static figurines that you can't really do anything with. I mean, I like to be able to go up to it and kind of change the way that it's posed or change the accessory it's holding, things like that. So statues, you really can't do that. So definitely not as fun.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about how collecting has affected other aspects of your life.
Well, it's affected it greatly. I mean, so as you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, so my job is basically I cover toy news in some shape or form, and that stemmed from originally what I wanted to do was open my own comic book store and sell comics and toys. And so, like, I went to college and I majored in marketing and management with the idea that one day I'd, be managing my own store and everything. And when I first got out of college, I, wanted to open my own store. Unfortunately, I didn't have much in the way of money, so I didn't really have money to go out and open a physical store and everything. And this was in the mid 90s, where the internet was just starting to take off and everything. And so I decided that I would try and start selling toys and comics and stuff online, and then eventually branch out into a physical store. And so I started this website. My original website was called American Dream Comics and Collectibles. And I started selling stuff. And then as I started doing that, and back then there wasn't like a ton of toy news websites. There was Wizard Magazine that had a section that covered some toys, and Toy Fair Magazine hadn't even started at this time. And then there was a few Star Wars fan sites out there, like a Rebel Scum was going at the time, and a couple others. But that was pretty much it. Maybe one or two action figure websites that were primarily just message boards. And so I started my idea was I'd start doing news about toys along with selling them. And then that seemed to work for a little bit. And I was doing decently, but I still didn't have a lot of revenue to throw into the business. I was working a full-time job and everything. And so I got to the point where I was having a hard time keeping up with everything. And I decided, well, I really can't further the store aspect without being able to hire people and stuff, just because, the mailing out stuff and packaging everything and all that was just so time consuming. So I eventually dropped the selling portion of the website and just focused completely on the news aspect. And that's how I essentially have gotten to today. So I would say, and all that obviously stems from collecting first as a kid and then later as an adult collector. And so I would say that, toy collecting has drastically affected my life in ways I would have never, had you asked me 15 years ago if this is what I'd be doing for a living, and I would have told you no way. So
well, as they say, it's always best to do what you love, right?
Yeah, I mean, that is 100%. It doesn't necessarily make it easy. I mean, a lot of people think that this is something that's easy to do, and it's not. But definitely, I learned early on that, no matter what you do, if you're going to be a success at it, it's going to take a lot of hard work, long hours. So you might as well do something that you enjoy as opposed to something that you don't enjoy.
Absolutely. So, JC, do you have anything else that you would like to share with our listeners?
No, I think other than I think action figure collecting has changed a lot over the years. I think it's just like with, say, comic books, which, I think has grown a lot in the years. I think, comics have kind of shook the stigma more than toy collecting has, but I think toy collecting, shares the same thing where there's a lot of people who collect toys, but they don't really like to share that information unless, they're sharing it with fellow toy collectors, kind of in the closet toy collectors, I call it. And I think that's changing. I think this is a hobby that's definitely grown over the years, and I hope will grow a lot more, become much more mainstream. I mean, with all the superhero movies and everything that are, some of the biggest box office sellers and stuff, I think that's definitely helped both comics and action figure collecting. And I hopefully that is a trend that will continue.
Absolutely. And it also seems like, especially the higher end collectibles, that's really grown drastically in the last, 5-10 years. Before, obviously, there weren't things like SH Figure Arts or Medicom Mafex figures, even like stuff like the Hot Toys. I mean, 10 years ago, that was just in its infancy. So it's really quite crazy how far things have come.
Yeah. And it's funny because overseas and in those countries, I mean, toy collecting is a much more serious hobby. I mean, those guys, the stigma there of, this is something, only people who live in their mother's basements do is not, nearly as prevalent. So I think there's always been a lot more emphasis on things like toy collecting and such overseas. And I think with the internet and having access to those import toys and stuff, I think that has also helped kind of break down some of those barriers. It definitely makes the hobby more expensive. An import figure, I don't personally collect things like Hot Toys just because they're too expensive. Well, I'm not a huge 12-inch collector, period, but also just, I can't personally afford to buy all those different Hot Toys. They're great figures and the detail on them are incredible, but they're also just incredibly expensive. So things like that I try and kind of stay away from as much as possible, but just because my wallet can't handle it. But definitely, there's a lot of good stuff out there by those import companies.
Sure. And I completely agree with you about the stigma that is placed on people that collect as adults. I was in Japan last year, and there's an immense number of toy stores, and even stores that you wouldn't think would have like higher end action figures, like drugstores or electronic stores. They're carrying like the SH Figure Arts, they're carrying like the Figma, all the higher end brands. And anytime you go to these toy aisles or you go to these toy stores, it's almost like 95% adults that are shopping in them.
I know, and I've always wanted to go. I've never had the opportunity to travel overseas, but I've talked to people who have, and it's like a totally different hobby over there, I think, and they take it so much more seriously than most of us do in this country. But I definitely think it's very cool, and I hope, like I said, I hope we continue to kind of move in that direction in this country, just like over there.
I think that would be very great if we did. All right, JC. Well, hey, it has been a pleasure hearing from you. Thank you for sharing your insight and your input. I encourage anyone listening to go look up Toy News International for the latest in toy and collecting news.
Well, again, thank you for having me, and I really appreciate it.
That'll do it for episode 18 of Cantina Chatter. Once again, I'd like to thank my guests, Erin from Toy Shelf Review, JC from Jurassic Collectables, Paul Harrison from Jedi Temple Archives, and JC from Toy News Eye. Be sure to visit them online. All of them are passionate fans and collectors who put a lot of hard work into their websites and YouTube channels. I will place some links in the show notes. Stay tuned for part 2 of Why We Collect coming in the next episode. As always, please be sure to subscribe to Victoria's Cantina and the Cantina Chatter Podcast wherever podcasts are available. Of course, giving Cantina Chatter positive and 5-star reviews is always helpful in increasing our rankings. Thank you for tuning in to the Cantina Chatter Podcast. Until next time, bye-bye.